So, a statement that Hillary Clinton made last week at a fundraiser has attracted quite a bit of backlash. She divided Donald Trump's supporters into two groups or baskets, one of which is a basket of deplorables, with every kind of bigotry and phobia. The other is made up of people who are frustrated and just trying to get by. She described the deplorables as irredeemable. The immediate criticism she received made her recalculate and clarify her remarks, but she's largely stood by them. The argument is only getting more heated at this point, and it looks like this may be a defining moment not just in this presidential election, but even in American politics for some time. This basket of deplorables statement isn't just about Hillary Clinton. If Hillary Clinton were incapacitated tomorrow, these statements would still be the default position of the Democratic Party. This controversy is about who the Republican Party is and who the Democratic Party is. Our discussion will necessarily get into Hillary Clinton's opinions and attitudes, but it's important to keep in mind that she represents the Democratic Party. Now, we're dealing here with a discussion of who belongs at least in American politics and maybe in American society. We're dealing with charges and countercharges that make middle ground in this election and in the political sphere almost impossible. I think this is a clear example of a situation where our actions and speech need to be guided by the ninth commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. As the Westminster Shorter Catechism puts it, the ninth commandment requireth the maintaining and promoting of truth between man, and of our own and our neighbor's good name, especially in witness bearing. The ninth commandment forbiddeth whatsoever is prejudicial to truth or injurious to our own or our neighbor's good name. Of course, that doesn't rule out criticism, even strong criticism. It only means that the criticism must be true and appropriate. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say there's 0% chance that I'll vote for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I don't think either one is morally qualified, and I'm not impressed overall with their policies. I do have opinions on which one I think would do the most damage, but I'm not going to actively support either one. Having said that, I know people personally who support Trump and people who support Clinton. I know people who support various third-party candidates. I know what they care about. Sometimes I hear them explain why they're changing their minds. I try to understand what they're thinking, and I try to empathize. I also want to evaluate. The statement Clinton made and her clarification the next day are several paragraphs, but I want to read them in full so you know what I'm responding to. So here's the statement she made at the LGBT for Hillary Gala in New York City. You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables, right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that, and he has lifted them up. He has given voice to their websites that used to only have 11,000 people, now 11 million. He tweets and retweets their offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric. Now, some of those folks, they are irredeemable, but thankfully they are not America. But the other basket, and I know this because I see friends from all over America here, I see friends from Florida and Georgia and South Carolina and Texas, as well as, New York and California. But that other basket of people are people who feel that the government has let them down, the economy has let them down. Nobody cares about them. Nobody worries about what happens to their lives and their futures, and they're just desperate for change. It doesn't really even matter where it comes from. They don't buy everything he says, but he seems to hold out some hope that their lives will be different. They won't wake up and see their jobs disappear, lose a kid to heroin, feel like they're in a dead end. Those are people we have to understand and empathize with as well. Mrs. Clinton got quite a bit of pushback on her comments, and not just from Trump and his supporters. The next day she walked back the part where she said that half of Trump's supporters belonged in each basket. So here's what she tweeted. Last night I was grossly generalistic, and that's never a good idea. I regret saying half. That was wrong. But let's be clear, what's really deplorable is that Donald Trump hired a major advocate for the so-called alt-right movement to run his campaign, and that David Duke and other white supremacists see him as a champion of their values. It's deplorable that Trump has built his campaign largely on prejudice and paranoia, and given a national platform to hateful views and voices, including by retweeting fringe bigots with a few dozen followers and spreading their message to 11 million people. It's deplorable that he's attacked a federal judge for his Mexican heritage, bullied a Gold Star family because of their Muslim faith, and promoted the lie that our first black president is not a true American. So I won't stop calling out bigotry and racist rhetoric in this campaign. I also meant what I said last night about empathy and the very real challenges we face as a country where so many people have been left out and left behind. As I said, many of Trump's supporters are hardworking Americans who just don't feel like the economy or our political system are working for them. I'm determined to bring our country together and make our economy work for everyone, not just those at the top, because we really are stronger together. Now, in her clarification, I think she gives some valid criticisms of Trump and his campaign. Some of the issues she raises Trump has never dealt with. Others he's only backed away from in a half-hearted way. These are not ideological or political issues, they're Trump issues. Trump does say outrageous things. He does appeal to racists and bigots, and he does have a hard time with distancing himself from racists and bigots. He took a step in the right direction this week by saying that he believes that President Obama was born in our country, but he refused to admit that he'd been wrong to question Obama's citizenship. He falsely claimed that Clinton had started the whole birther controversy. His admission only slightly improves his position, if at all. So Clinton's second statement was good. In fact, in her first, she was much broader, and as she says, generalistic. The discussion about political polarization and offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric gets down to some of the specific things that are so controversial. As I read her original statement, some red flags immediately go up. Before we get to the biggest problems in Clinton's statement, we should note that every one of these descriptions is a minefield for progressives like Hillary Clinton. Even a term like racist is loaded, because progressivism divides people into classes and pits them against each other. When a progressive uses the term racist, it seems to be typically referring to one thing and one thing alone: perceived negative attitudes and actions by white people against people of other races. White people, as a class, are blamed for every racist word and action by a white person in the past or present, and we're expected to confess our guilt and make restitution. This is a lifelong responsibility, and non-white people have no corresponding responsibility for their own or others' racially motivated offenses against white people. Even opposition to the ideas or actions of a non-white leader, such as Obama, is taken as a symptom of a racist mindset. So she says we're stronger together, but there is a huge racial barrier that the progressive movement doesn't seem to want to deal with. Every one of the other categories she mentions, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, is an area where progressives have undermined the rule of law and been aggressive toward individuals and groups of people in the name of social justice. So although people like me may agree with some of Mrs. Clinton's criticisms of Donald Trump, in some ways she and her colleagues have systematically eroded the credibility that they would need to make those criticisms stick. With this trust deficit, is it any wonder that Mrs. Clinton's complaints generate anger rather than remorse? I think that is a problem because, as I say, she does highlight some real and serious issues. Apart from class warfare, though, there are other legitimate concerns that many Hillary opponents share about this statement. It's not fair to dismiss all concerns about current immigration policy, for example, as xenophobia. There are legitimate concerns about upholding the dignity of the law. There are legitimate concerns about making people citizens who don't share the values that protect peace and justice in our society. Illegal immigrants, for example, illegal immigration should raise questions about a person's commitment to obeying the law and upholding our system of government. That's just the most obvious example. If you don't get where conservatives are coming from on that, then you're not going to understand anything else we say about immigration. So you have a track record of progressive offenses and an apparent dismissal of legitimate concerns. Then we get to the part that's most troubling. That's where she uses the term phobic to describe opposition to people who are actively working to overthrow our laws and system of government. Homosexuals and Muslims don't all fit into this category, but it's willful, blind prejudice to pretend that hostile agendas are outside the mainstream in LGBT and Muslim communities. So-called gay marriage, the transgender mandates, and other LGBT policy priorities use the executive and judicial branches to treat the Constitution like a plaything, rather than the law of the land. Political Islam threatens the First Amendment protection of religious liberty, as well as other rights guaranteed to Americans in the Constitution. These aren't just ideas that are out there somewhere. These are priorities for people who belong to Clinton's core constituency. So Donald Trump is extreme. He won't admit that he has a problem, and his behavior and speech are all over the map when it comes to racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and bigotry toward Muslims. He needs to be called out. But so does Hillary Clinton. If she's going to make statements about people who are irredeemable, people who don't need the empathy and understanding of her friends, people who are not America, then she should be specific and responsible in identifying those people. She shouldn't try to marginalize Americans who actually believe in the rule of law or who are being persecuted for their religious beliefs. Look, I'm not going to pretend that Congress doesn't have problems. I'm not going to say the Constitution couldn't use some updating to address challenges that we face in the modern world. But if we're going to introduce new legal rights, for example, or recalibrate the balance of powers, we can't ignore the fact that our laws are under a continuing assault from within our own government. When we talk about gridlock in Washington or the shortcomings of our legislative system, I think we need to recognize that that is where the fault lies. It lies with people who do not have respect for the rule of law. No amount of tinkering with the Constitution or with the way Washington works is going to compensate for that. You might say, well, why does it matter whether it's the President, the Supreme Court, or Congress who makes the laws? It matters because the rule of law is based on the consent of the governed. Congress reflects the political and geographical makeup of the people as a whole. Competing needs and interests are represented, and compromise is needed to make laws. You need to form a majority in both houses to make a law. To form a majority, you need to take the preferences and needs of minorities into account. That's something lawmakers should do anyway, but they're almost forced to do it whether they want to or not. Judges usually only represent the people indirectly because they're appointed, not elected. Some judges, like the Supreme Court justices, have lifetime appointments. You could theoretically replace them when they behave badly, but practically that's almost impossible to do. They're the ones who most need to follow the law for the good of society because they're the ones who are the least likely to suffer from the public's disapproval of their decisions. Presidents need to execute the law, not make the law, because they're not subject to the restraints that legislators are subject to. They don't have to worry about re-election every 2 years like representatives do. Presidents don't have to be as concerned about local interests like the houses of Congress are. Presidents are able to form stabler majorities of Americans who are loyal to them or their political parties. They don't have to pay as much attention to the needs of minorities because they're able to form grand coalitions. You see that happening with both presidential candidates this year. Presidents have the potential to be more polarizing than any other government official. It was a presidential election that precipitated the Civil War. The battle lines were formed for the most part based on support of or opposition to the president. Now, we have a presidential election between two camps that are polarized over similar issues. We don't have a Lincoln this time around, though. On the one side, we have a dream candidate for racists. On the other, we have someone whose agenda is largely based on the rejection of the rule of law. These two camps demonize each other. Anyone who doesn't join either camp is caught in the crossfire. Now, I don't vote for racists, and I don't vote for criminals. Don't tell me I'm a racist if I don't vote for a criminal, and don't tell me I'm a criminal if I don't vote for a racist. I hope Donald Trump admits and renounces his racism. I hope Hillary Clinton ends her attack on the Constitution. Nothing could make me vote for either of them at this point, but I do care about their positions and the positions of their respective parties. There are two things that could help the country recover after this election. One would be if the major parties rejected the worst parts of their candidates' positions. The other would be if the presidential candidates themselves stepped down and let someone else run. In the best case scenario, at least one party would do both of these. I don't know what happens otherwise, but I'm sure of one thing. It won't be good.